Hello and welcome to Doom Does DVD, and this is Disney Classics number 37, Tarzan. Now this one, feels a bit weird to me. Like, in my head, it feels like Tarzan is a big famous story that's been told many, many times. And yet, when I think about it, I realise I can't tell you a single detail about that story. A guy lives in the jungle for some reason, and there's a love interest called Jane. That's all I know. So it's this weird thing where what I think I should know doesn't match what I actually know. I try and think about things I know about this story, and the only things that ever come to mind are things that are actually from the Jungle Book or from the 1997 Brendan Fraser film George of the Jungle. But that film from a couple of years before this one, which I'm pretty sure I actually saw at the cinema, which is actually more of a spoof based on a cartoon parody version of the story from the 60s. And apart from the watch out for that tree jingle from that, I don't remember much about that either. So beyond me Tarzan, you Jane, I can't think of a single fact about this before having seen it. But unfortunately, given that this is considered the last film in the Disney Renaissance era, I'm slightly concerned that they didn't go out on a high note. And so my expectations for this one are pretty on the low side. But sometimes that can turn out to be a pleasant surprise, so let's watch it and find out. So it turns out that this one does actually fit in the pleasant surprise category. Initially I was a little bit unsure about the whole thing. It dives straight into the story of Tarzan's parents getting shipwrecked on some weird island without sort of any preamble. It's just straight into the action. Burning ship, lifeboat, build house on island. Doesn't take its time with anything. Then we start to get a song mixed in, which is sort of the narration of what's going on from Phil Collins of all people. I instantly recognised his voice. And so, at that point I'm thinking, they're going more sort of like Lion King style and trying to get some more famous names into the music. Then there's all the stuff where Tarzan is a baby and then a young boy, and I just wasn't really into all that. Some poor comedy choices that didn't work for me, and I wasn't entirely feeling it. And on top of all that, the animation here is a very different style. I was thinking a bit too much about that rather than the content of the film. It's like everything seemed just a bit too clean and polished. It felt like this was the most computers had ever been used in a Disney film. Turns out there's some very interesting technology behind that, which we'll talk about in a bit. But during the initial 15 minutes, with this new style of animation and the unfunny antics of child Tarzan, I just wasn't really feeling it. It took some getting used to. But as things moved on, Tarzan grew up, other humans arrived on the island, I started to enjoy it a lot more, basically from the introduction of Jane. Although even Jane took a little bit of a warm-up. It's like initially she seems a bit too prim and proper, but it doesn't actually take long for that character to feel a bit more rounded out and have an actual personality and be somewhat more interesting. And then continuing the whole weird place the Tarzan story has or doesn't have in my brain, it's like parts of this film seemed really familiar, but then other parts felt completely new. Like, I don't know whether I've just seen some clips of it sometimes, or I've seen it before and completely forgotten about it, or I'm just remembering elements of this story from other versions of the Tarzan story, but it just doesn't quite fit right in my mind. It's like I would have thought I would remember things like Phil Collins doing the soundtrack, for example. Not even just the one song at the beginning, it's multiple throughout. His songs are like the narration at multiple points in the story. Because it turns out the directors thought that a naked man standing on a branch suddenly breaking into song would look kind of ridiculous. I'm not sure whether that's the most ridiculous thing that would have ever been in a Disney film, but I did find it actually a quite nice change of pace to go back to the more sort of abstract narration style songs rather than having the characters themselves break into song. Not that I'm against that or anything, it's just, when you're going through a box set of Disney films, we've had quite a lot of that recently. And so it took me a while to warm up to it, but by the end I was fully engrossed and having a great time watching it. Another interesting production aspect about this one is that it's the first time I've noticed, at least, international outsourcing. Now, like, obviously the main animation studio is in Burbank, California. And, you know, that's still where all the decisions gets made and it's the primary location. And as I understand it, it kind of that has to be the main production office for a film to be considered a Disney classic. But the last 3 or 4 have had some of the work outsourced to a sub-studio in Florida. This one used both of those and a studio in Paris. I haven't actually looked up the exact locations of these offices, but I presume it's not a coincidence that these are all also the locations of Disney parks. But, you know, it's 1999 at this point, the internet is a thing, so international collaboration is becoming much more feasible. Although I imagine speeds would have been pretty slow and expensive back then. But, you know, this is Disney, they could probably afford that. Some accountant will have done the cost analysis of, you know, buying fancy internet lines versus moving that production to the US. And probably helped a lot by the fact that so much of this is done on computer, because it's much easier to send around digital files. They're still using caps at this point to scan all the hand drawings and then digitally paint them. But that's just for the characters. For the backgrounds here, they've got a whole new system called Deep Canvas. So here all the backgrounds are not hand-drawn. They've all been done in a computer and are a 3D environment, which, you know, they can rotate around and do fancy camera moves and chase Tarzan down trees and all sorts of crazy stuff, which won a bunch of technical awards. But that's also what took me a while to get used to seeing, because that's brand new for Disney. And in fact, probably brand new for the entire film industry at this point. It sounds like an amazing piece of technology that, you know, like, does everything, that records individual digital brush strokes within the software. So it still looks hand-drawn, but it preserves that when it rotates and everything. So, you know, it's complete 3D art that you can move through and around. And they've got the quality of the texture rendering to the point where it matches the 2D drawings. So while you can tell it was done with a computer because it's doing camera moves that are pretty much impossible to do with hand-drawn animation, it also doesn't stick out as much. So yeah, as I said, once I got used to everything here, I really enjoyed this one by the end, along with some very interesting technical achievements to find out about along with it. What did you guys think of Tarzan? Let me know about that in the comments down below. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again next week with Fantasia 2000.